amazing, intelligent, hilarious, down to earth, loved being my mom. Certain. Two thousand and twenty. There is absolutely no way I could share this story or tell this story without talking about, or mentioning at least, the beast called 2020. The only reason I have to share that a little bit is just to give you an idea as to where I was at mentally towards the mid part of 2020. I've had the same best friend for 26 years. We was in pre-K together, everything. Our parents were friends together when they were pregnant with us. And in July of 2020, I supported my best friend as her mother passed away, someone else that was a mother figure to me. I'd known her my entire life. I spent almost every day at her house after school growing up. She was another mother to me. So losing her, that put me in a bad place. Shortly after, another one of my mother figures, rest in peace, Rosalind Shoulders, she got a diagnosis, died within maybe 3 or 4 weeks. And so to add insult to injury, my mother, my entire life growing up, was probably one of the most healthiest women you'll ever meet in your life. I have no recollection, I have no memory of my mother ever being hospitalized or anything of that sort. She didn't have diabetes, she didn't have high blood pressure, she had legit no health complications. And that was, in my opinion, mainly because we used to call her a rabbit. She ate vegetables every day, all day. She cooked like, she was probably one of the most healthiest people you'd ever know. And so she went to the gym regularly. She took her health very seriously. She always made it a point to let me know that you should take your health seriously because as African Americans, a lot of those things run in our bloodline. And so she wanted to make sure that all of that stuff that happened stopped with the previous generations. She was the epitome of what health looked like in a black woman. In 2017, my maternal grandmother fell sick, and they called on to my mother to relocate from New York to South Carolina to take care of her. So from 2017 up until the day she passed, my mother resided in Georgetown, South Carolina, where the maternal side of my family is from. In May of 2020, my mother went to the emergency room. I'd never heard my mother complain about any type of pain. Maybe when she beat me, but no. I never heard her complain about any type of pain. She was complaining that she had some lower abdomen problems or some lower abdomen pain. So she went to the emergency room. They checked her out, and they told her that she was approaching 60 and that she didn't need her female organs anymore. Told her that they'll just make an appointment for her to have a normal hysterectomy. They would remove those female organs from her body. She was scheduled to have this procedure on August 18th, 2020. Right after attending a funeral for another mother figure who had passed away, who was a pastor, I went to the service, and immediately following the next day, I flew down to South Carolina, knowing that my mother had the procedure the next day. I had planned on staying there for a little while because they had said that the recovery process would probably be about, maybe a week or two. So I just wanted to go down there just to offer support, and I know she wouldn't be able to do any type of physical labor or manual labor. So I went down to assist her. Surgeries are always early, 6 o'clock in the morning. Drove her to the facility. Got there, stayed with her until they checked her in. The surgeon and the nurse, they gave me all of the details because this is still in 2020, so the COVID rules were still in effect. I couldn't stay in the hospital. I was able to go in, walk her in, listen to all of the directives, listen to all of the procedures, and even sign some papers. But they did tell me that they had an app that was available to me with a number that they would give me to track the process of her procedure. They told me I could not physically stay inside of the hospital itself. The surgeon informed me that the procedure would take about 2 hours, maybe 3 tops. 1 hour for the procedure, and then another hour for the anesthesia just to wear off. So this time, it's probably about maybe 7:30. I got back to the house. I was tracking on the app everything. I put the number in. You can imagine, I was just sitting there. I never knew my mother to go through a surgery before, so I was nervous just in that regard. Like, hey, my mother has to have surgery. Like, I was just nervous about that. That was I'd say the most of my problem at that time. So I'm tracking the app constantly, refreshing it constantly every 5 minutes. I was trying to watch some shows to get my mind off of it. And so I would track it. So finally I was able to see she was in the pre-op room. She was getting ready to go into the operation room. And then I finally got to where it said operation room. It said that she was in the operation room for all of 30 minutes. After 30 minutes, the app then said she was in post-op. So I was like, okay, that's a little strange. Right after I noticed the change on the app, my phone rang. And it was the surgeon. Her name was Dr. Grayville. I'll never forget her. She said to me, she said, I can't perform this procedure on your mother. And I said, I'm sorry? She says, I cannot perform this procedure on your mother. She said, I'm going to give you some context. She said, I am a surgeon. She said, but I'm also an oncologist. And she said to me, I opened your mom. Your mother has stage 3 ovarian cancer. What? I can still recall the feeling that I had in that moment. And all at the time, my 24, 25 years, I had never felt anything like that in my life. Like, I legit think I had an out-of-body experience. I could not believe that the words cancer and my mother were in the same sentence. So I processed it. I made a few phone calls. Dr. Grayville said to me before she hung up, she said, I need you to come in. She said, your mother is still asleep. I'm waiting for her to wake up from the anesthesia. She doesn't know yet. Why don't you come in and we can tell her together? Now, the hospital was only about maybe 15, 20 minutes away from the house. That had to be, on record, one of the longest drives, felt like one of the longest drives I had ever taken in my life. I cried so bad to the point where I couldn't even talk. I cried so bad, my eyes felt like they were swollen. I couldn't see even drive. I cried. Got to the hospital. By the time I got there, my mother was actually awake. So I walked in, asked for Dr. Grayville. She had them escort me to the back. I went and sat in the room with my mother. She was awake. The anesthesia had wore off. She was awake. She was perky. She was like, I'm happy. I finally got this done. I'm happy. And I said, yeah, I didn't have it in me to even tell her at that second. I went inside. I sat in the room with my mom. She was in good spirits. She had woke up. She said she was good. I asked her, I'm like, how do you feel? She said, I feel fine. I said, I feel fine. I said, okay. So Dr. Grayville comes in and she looks at me. She said, you told her? I said, no. So my mother looked. She said, told me what? Dr. Grayville said, well, Ms. Jenkins, she said, I didn't perform the procedure on you. And she says to her, you have stage 3 cancer. And she said, it would be foolish for me to proceed with this procedure. She said, you're not supposed to just touch and move cancer any old type of way. She said, if I would have performed this procedure on you, I would have caused this cancer to spread and you would die in months. So she said, I made the executive decision not to perform the procedure. I paused because I was just waiting. I said, oh, my mother's she's gonna cry, she's gonna break down, all of this. My mother smiled. She said, okay. She said, I thank you for that. And her exact words were, what's next? I was confused. I wanted to know if she was putting on a front for me. And I didn't know how she was even able to do that. And to this day, I still don't know. But she said, what's next? Went back to the house. Her sister was there. My aunt was down there as well. My aunt knew. My aunt was a mess. And my mother said, I'm fine. She said, I'm good. She said, I trust God. On the day after her 60th birthday, they said, we're going to perform an 8-hour procedure. She would go under the knife for 8 hours. They were going to cut her torso in a T. And they said, we're going to go in and we're going to take out everything that we see. 8 hours of surgery. I'm sitting in this hospital now on September 27th, 2020 for 8 hours. I wasn't in my body. I was not in my body. I think I stood in front of that television watching her name and where she was at for at least all of those 8 hours. Surgeon says to us that the procedure went well, but they still wanted to perform some chemo. She went through the chemo. I want to highlight that through this entire process, my mother went to work every single solitary day. She might have missed work twice, and that was only due to the doctors putting her appointments on days that she worked. My mother went to work every day, Monday through Friday. Never whined, never complained. Even during chemo, I know there were many days where her body was in pain. She didn't have the strength. She went to work every day. After a few months, they did a biopsy. They said, no, this chemo's not working. Some cancer cells came back. Went through another session of chemo for a few weeks. Did another biopsy. They said, yeah, this chemo's not working. We're going to try another one. But all in this time, she was good. She never exhibited any she didn't even look like she was on chemo. I was sitting in a watch night service. I was with my brother. I was accompanying my brother, Pastor Jaleel Spence. He was preaching out at the Winners Assembly in Brooklyn, New York for their watch night service. My mother and I had this routine that we did. If we weren't in the same space on New Year's, we would text each other at exactly 12 o'clock every time and say Happy New Year. I texted my mother Happy New Year. She texted me back. At that moment, the Holy Spirit ministered to me. She's not going to make it to the end of 2022. And at this time, she was still doing good, going through the chemo, but still going strong. Body didn't look like she was in chemo. She had for the most part, had a healthy relationship, I guess you could say, with the chemo. It didn't do her body bad. Throughout this entire process, although I was a little nervous, there was never a point where I thought my mother was going to die. And that's the God's honest truth. I never thought my mother was going to die. I was nervous naturally because I'm her son. But I'm not sure if it was a defense mechanism that didn't allow the thought to enter my mind. But there was never, or it could have been my faith, but there was never a moment where I thought that she was going to die and this was going to kill her. But I sat in the service, I bowed my head in my lap, and I cried. I cried, and I cried. At that point is when I started my grieving process. God literally knows us. He knows what we can handle. He knows what we can take. He knows how to handle us. I grieved backwards. From January up until July of 2022, I grieved. And I'm still grieving now, but I started my grieving process in January. My mother's health didn't even decline until about May. April came, I was laying in my bed, and I just started weeping. I and I started praying, and I began to legitimately prepare myself. I just started preparing myself. May comes now. At this point, she's lost over 30, 40 pounds. If you know my mother was already small, lost 30, 40 pounds. Shout out to my mother's sister, my aunt, who stepped in that, I'd say around February of 2022. And she stayed with my mother up until the day that she passed, to make it easier for me so I could still be in New York to work. May came, the cancer had grew so much to the point where it was suffocating or squeezing her intestines. At this point now, her body is weak. It's like out of nowhere, she just became small and she wasn't herself anymore. June came, the doctor said, there's nothing more we can do. Those are never the words that anybody wants to hear in a situation like that. There's nothing more we can do. It's like that just echoed in my ears for like the next week. He pulled me outside and he said, it's time that you start looking into hospice care. He said if I give her any more treatments or chemo, it'll kill her faster than the cancer because her body was too weak to sustain any more treatment. I spoke to my mother about it. She said she wants to be in hospice at home. So we honored her wishes. After the conversation, she grabbed my hand and she said to me, if anything were to happen to me, I need you to make me a promise. And she said to me, I need you to do my eulogy. And at that moment, all I could do was just nod my head and I said, okay. The funny part about her saying that is, in about March, I was laying in the bed and I wasn't even studying. I wasn't studying at all. I was laying down, probably watching something on TV. And as clear as day, the story of the woman with the issue of blood appeared to me. And the first verse, it said, and a certain woman which had an issue of blood. And a certain woman just stuck out to me. I never sent a word to anybody. I wrote it in my phone. I actually wrote out the notes to the message in my phone, to the sermon in my phone. I wrote it out. And I just left it there. July comes. My birthday is July 8th. I felt a very strong unction to just go down south for my birthday. So I celebrated here, got on a flight at 4 a.m., spent all day Saturday with my mother. After I saw her, she stopped talking. She didn't speak anymore. She just laid there asleep. We were trying to get her to drink smoothies and stuff, but she slept. She might have made a sound every now and again if we called her. She said, made a sound, but after I got there and she said happy birthday to me, she ceased talking. She did not talk anymore. I knew at that moment that would be the last time I saw my mother alive. So I stayed there all day Saturday. I flew up to New York Sunday morning because I really wanted to be in church. Next day, July 11th, I went to work. Worked all day. I got home and I took a nap, which is something I never really do. At around 8 o'clock, my aunt called me and said her breathing is becoming labored. I got up, I sat on the edge of my bed, and I did not move for an hour and a half. I sat there. At 9:40, my phone rang, and it was my great aunt and my aunt, and I could hear my aunt screaming, my mother's sister, I could hear her screaming in the phone. And my great aunt was trying to be respectful. She was trying to have my aunt be the one to tell me. But I said to her, I said, you can tell me. I said, is she gone? And she said, yes. I said, okay. And surprisingly, that moment was the most peace I had ever experienced in the entire ordeal for those 2 years. And it sounds crazy to say, but throughout the entire 2 years of this battle, that moment, July 11th, 2022 at 9:40, was the most peace I'd ever felt in my life. And I had to rebuke myself, especially as a preacher, as a man of God. I had to rebuke myself because for years, preaching for about 12 years, getting the mic and just start hooping about, oh, the peace of God that surpasses all understanding, and I had no idea what I was talking about. In that moment, I literally felt a peace that could surpass understanding. My goal for doing this, as I said, was to share her story, but I also wanted to shed light on how amazing God is and how sovereign He is and how He deals with us. Number one, His sovereignty, His all-knowingness comes into play from the very day she had the surgery, when Dr. Grayville said, if anybody else would have performed this procedure, they would have not recognized the cancer and it would have cut your mother's life short. The sovereignty in that is, the small victories. Had anybody else been the person to perform that procedure, I would have never had another year and a half with my mom. So that taught me to appreciate, and it taught me to realize that throughout everything we deal with in life, throughout every loss, every tragedy, through every mishap, every up, every down, if you take a second and remove yourself from what should be the natural human response to tragedy, if you take a second and step out of that, you can see God's hand in the midst of all of that stuff. My encouragement to you would be, no matter what it is that you're facing, take a second, step out of it, look at the big picture. You'll see God's hand orchestrating this in some way. And I'm telling you, it might not feel like it, but it will give you some sort of peace. That was one. Number two would be, I'm a mama's boy, right? Anybody that knows me knows I'm a mama's boy. I love my mom. My mom is Superman. He knows how to deal with us. God knew that I couldn't take an out of nowhere death or without any warning death. God knows us. He knows us, right? Because I even had a few of my friends tell me that they were shocked because how I responded to it was not how they would have expected Charles to respond. Because, I'm very naturally expressive in everything that I do. God literally walked me through this entire process. Never left me in the dark. Walked with me the entire time. So my heart is broken because my mom is gone. But it made me learn God in a whole different way. He will walk you through this. He is the Parakletos. He'll walk with you. He's the word that walks with you. He will do it. So if you allow him that chance, give him that space, and give him that opportunity, I promise you, let God work in every one of your tragedies. Rest in peace, Mom. I don't know how I'm going to get through the rest of my life without you, but I do trust God.